You know them, you love to hate them. They are the guitar snobs, and here are all the things that they get wrong. What's up, everyone? I'm Jack Fossett. Welcome to Real Guitar Talk, the series where I tackle some real issues for guitar players. Today, I want to talk about guitar snobs. Now, I'm going to talk about an anecdote. Bear with me. This is totally a humble brag anecdote. When my wife and I were on our honeymoon, we went on a Caribbean cruise, and we were on the island of Antigua and decided to play golf. So she just kind of came along with me because I play golf, and she just wanted to, enjoy the time outdoors. So we got paired up with this other couple, though, and the guy was really like a frat bro type. They were older, probably about 10 years older than us, but he was your typical kind of macho, take control of the situation alpha guy. And so, of course, he wanted to play competitively. Just, kind of just like, oh, those are your clubs. He had a nicer set of clubs than I did. And, he wanted to bet money per hole, which I just don't do because it's stupid. And so anyway, I was just like, no, it's cool. I'm just here to play golf. We'll pair up with you, but we're just here to enjoy a nice day outside. From the first shot on the first hole, I totally smoked him the entire time. The first one was a medium, short par 4. I hit it within a foot of the pin, first stroke, and he really backed down pretty quickly. I could have taken a lot of money from it, but I didn't because it's just, again, it's stupid. Here's the point of this video. This is why I'm going to roll this in. There is no beating guitar snobs at their own game. The way to beat guitar snobs is to not play their game. So the intent of this video is not to give you ammunition to load up in the comment section on a, guitar forum or something like that. This is more to help out people who might feel bad about their guitar because a guitar snob has put them down. Because they've been nitpicky about something that you have that you love, and maybe you're just like, oh, geez, I really loved this. Now people are putting it down. Here's some reasons why you shouldn't feel bad about your stuff if a guitar snob has put you down. But again, don't go after them, because the only way to win is to not play their game. So, here's the first thing. Now, we've talked a lot about guitar brands on this channel, so I don't want to harp on this too much, but the guitar brand that you play really doesn't matter. As long as you're playing, from a company that's making guitars ethically, then the brand that you're playing doesn't have any implication on you as a player or a person. There are obviously great players who play low-end guitars, there are crappy players who play really high-end guitars, and there's everything in between. Now, I'm not going to put down anyone who appreciates higher craftsmanship. That's an important point. I'm, not saying that people who spend a lot of money on high-end guitars are bad. It's only bad if they try and lord it over you, right? But, if you're looking at a finely tooled leather wallet versus one that your buddy put together made out of duct tape in school, it's like, yeah, okay, that one's better. In the end, they both hold your money. Now, when you talk about guitar brands, there are obviously some who make guitars better than others by any objective standard. Again, it's more about your attitude about it and whether or not you think you're better than someone else for having a higher end guitar. And it should have no bearing on how much you love a guitar. Like, one of my absolute favorite guitars is a Fender Stratocaster, and it's not even the highest end Stratocaster that I own. It's just my favorite for a number of different reasons. So don't think that because someone else's guitar might be objectively made better, that it's somehow makes yours worthless. But we are going to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the things that people say make them better versus aren't. So let's start with this one. Okay, tonewoods are one of those things that I think they actually do make a difference, but not the way that people think they do. People get really worked up about high-end tonewoods and this and that and that and this. Ultimately, the important thing is that you have a resonant piece of wood, and that really doesn't actually matter as much on the type of wood that it is, so much as the individual piece of wood. I think it matters less than people who are really into high-end guitars like to say, but it does matter. And, you play a couple acoustic guitars that are made of different tone woods, and yeah, you'll notice a difference, maybe less so on an electric guitar, but it does matter. But here's one of the example I want to give. I have two different Gibson SGs. They're both made of mahogany. One is extremely dense and heavy, one is extremely light. The dense and heavy one is a lot darker. The lighter one is a lot brighter. That's kind of what I'm going for here, because they're both made of mahogany. So it depends on the cut of wood that you have and how resonant that particular cut of wood is. I've heard really, really cheap wood that is more resonant and sounds better than some higher end wood that happened to just be a lousier cut. So don't necessarily think that your guitar needs to be made of some high-end tone wood in order to sound good. It's really more of a case-by-case basis. And again, I do think it matters. I think it affects the character of the guitars, but probably just not as much as Tone Snobs want you to think that it does. And certainly not to the amount of extra money that people want you to shell out to get something just because it's sort of unique and exotic. Now there's a second part to the guitar resonance thing, and this is one that guitar snobs absolutely love to harp on. Finish is something that I think is a lot different than people imagine that it is. This is one of the things. So you talk about nitro finishes, and a nitro finish is a fine finish. It's a really good finish. I won't say it's necessarily better or worse than another finish. Generally speaking, with a finish, it depends on how well it was applied. Now, nitro is better for certain things, which we're going to talk about in a second here, but the thing about it is, it matters that your guitar is resonant. You know how you ever hear people say that they like nitro because they're like, well, nitro lets the guitar breathe. The wood in your guitar is dead. It's not breathing. It was breathing when it was alive. It's not breathing now. What it is doing is vibrating. Here's one of the things. So when the poly finishes started coming around, which is all the way back to the late 60s, for Fender. In fact, and you can feel free to check me on this. This is as far as I can tell. It's quite possible that Jimi Hendrix's Woodstock Stratocaster had a poly finish, not a nitro finish. Again, feel free to check the facts on that, but it looks like his Stratocaster was made in late 68 that he used in Woodstock, which is around when, I think it was in sometime in 68 when Fender switched over to poly. Anyway, again, feel free to fact check me on that, but also his pedals weren't true bypass. One of the things to consider is that when companies started switching over to poly finishes, for instance, like Fender, they were now owned by CBS. Now, the idea of having a worn-in guitar and making that more valuable was like way off of anybody's radar at that point. So the poly finishes went on easier and were more durable and more shiny. It made a lot of sense from a company standpoint to switch over to poly finishes. They just, everything about it made more sense. One of the things is that a poly finish goes on much thicker. The nitro finishes are very, very thin. The issue with a poly finish is if it's, people talk about that dipped in plastic feel. That's really just if the finish is too thick and it limits the vibrations of the wood. If you have a really well applied poly finish versus a, nitro finish that's about the same thickness, it shouldn't really make that much of a difference to your wood's resonance. And even that being said, I know people who have guitars from the 70s and 80s that were in thick poly that are pretty dead sounding pieces of wood, and they still love their guitars and they make great music off of it. The thing about nitro, too, is I think it's honestly a ruse in a lot of ways for a lot of people. I think a lot of people don't really care about that resonance so much. So listen, I have a polyester finished Stratocaster that sounds better than one that I have that has a nitro finish. Now, in some ways, that might go back to the wood. Again, we're talking about a resonant piece of wood versus, being more... It's hard to tell because tone is cumulative. There's a lot of things that affect it. But my point is that, hey, this is a polyester finish, which is a finish that a lot of people thumb their nose at. And it just sounds amazing. It's a great sounding guitar. But again, what I'm going to say here is that with nitro, I think what most people really want is they want it to sink in. They want it to check, and they want it to look like a guitar that's really worn out. Which leads me to the next one. Okay, relics and worn guitars in general. The thing is that people want your guitar to represent your experience as a player. You want to go out with your guitar, and you want people to see it and be like, that guy knows how to play. That guy has seen some stages in his life. That guy has played all over. We basically all want to be Strider from that scene in the Fellowship of the Ring where they come to the inn at Bree and, all around here, he's known as Strider. And he's sitting in the corner with his hood on and he's just his pipe and it just kind of illuminates his face and things. It's a guy thing. We all kind of want to be like Strider in that scene. I've played multiple worn gear out. Some relics, some gear that's actually worn. And most of the time, it actually gets negative comments. At least that's been my experience. Like my basement is 100% natural wear, which, because it's from 1990, it has seen a lot of stages, both from its previous owner and from me. And most of the time, the comments I get on that are not, just like, wow, people go, whoa, what did you do to your amp? Why didn't you take care of it? Which brings up a really important point. Two guitars that I think really affected this were Eric Clapton's Blackie and Stevie Ray Vaughan's Number One. In order to get wear like that, it doesn't just take use. It actually takes abuse. Now, Clapton, in an interview, actually said that he got the guitars pretty worn. He said he knew they would be good that way because they had been played. He could tell they had been played a lot. Stevie Ray Vaughan's, if you ever see some of the stuff that he did to his guitars on stage, you know that that's not natural, normal wear just from playing it a lot. In fact, you can have a vintage guitar with a thin nitro finish, and it could have almost zero wear on it, even if you play it a lot on a lot of stages, if you take care of it. So the idea that a really worn guitar is somehow going to represent your experience as a player, they just don't line up the way a lot of people think that they're going to line up. And again, because there are so many relics out there nowadays, I think people tend to more expect that it's fake wear. Yeah, I had a relic guitar that was, really, really good guitar, sound and play great. I loved the feel because it was worn in, and so it felt like kind of your old best friend. But when I would take it out to gigs, there was a guy that I played with, and he'd be kind of like, he bought it that way. Kind of thumbed his nose at it a little bit because why didn't you just get a new guitar that's nice? Ultimately, it leads to one thing. This is one that I've heard Bonamassa even say. He said, vintage is not necessarily better. There were some things that vintage guitar makers did that needed to be improved upon. But because the early guitars were so good in so many ways and have become so kind of mythical and legendary in so many ways, with, of course, the ridiculous price tags, there's this kind of feeling that if yours is somehow closer to vintage or a real vintage, that it somehow makes it better. It somehow makes it higher end. And you can see this with the custom shop guitars. One of the things that I think is interesting about the custom shop is custom shop really should be vintage recreation shop for the big companies, because that's what they're doing. They're making vintage recreations, which are not necessarily better. Now, they're not necessarily bad, and I'm not putting down custom shop guitars as far as quality, because they certainly do an excellent job. But one of the things that I've talked about on this channel a lot, though, is like, for instance, on Fender guitars, having the truss rod adjustment up in the headstock. That was an improvement. That was something that the vintage guitars didn't have. They didn't have them until the 70s. On a Stratocaster, having the 5-way switch so that you can access those in the middle tones, and then also later on having a reverse wind, reverse polarity middle pickup to give you hum canceling on the 2 and 4 position. Now, that's no discredit to Leo Fender. He certainly made an incredible thing that was very close to perfect from the beginning. But my point is that there's this kind of like, sometimes guitar snobs will look at something that has modern appointments and see it as less because it's not like the vintage one, because the vintage one is somehow part of American history. And you see it on Gibson guitars too. One of the things that I've noticed is now Gibson headstocks and peg head locations have been pretty inconsistent over the years. They've changed that a lot. There are a lot of different headstock sizes. There were a lot of different peg head placements. But one of the things that I've noticed is on the old 50s guitars, if you looked particularly at the placement of the low E and the high E peg head, they were a little bit further in, which created more of an angle for the strings, whereas modern ones are actually not only more straight on, but they're set further back, which allows the other peg heads to have less of a sharp angle. Now, I know Gibsons are not especially known for great tuning stability, but the modern placement actually improves tuning stability. However, custom shop, again, it's more of a vintage recreation shop. They make them vintage accurate where the old peg heads were, even though that's probably going to lead to a little bit less tuning stability. Obviously, that's another one where there are other things that lead to tuning stability, probably like the cut of the nut is going to be more important, and that's probably going to be better on the custom shop, which will even it out a little bit. But again, you see my point. One is kind of like objectively better, like having the string pass over the nut at more of a straight angle is going to lead to better tuning stability. So you see these sort of little things that you go, okay, shouldn't a custom shop be making it at its like sort of peak functionality? It's an interesting thing to consider. All of this leads me to the number one point. I remember thinking this with the Klon Centaur stuff. Now, a lot of people have hopefully realized at this point, the reason that the Klon Centaurs are so expensive is not because they're necessarily that much better, it's because they're rare. You know, it's just like a 59 Les Paul versus a custom shop 59 Les Paul. Is the original better? It might actually not be. You know, if you get like a really high-end Gibson, you know, Les Paul, it might actually play better than the old 59. Might not. But whether or not it does, is the difference literally hundreds of thousands of dollars? No. The fact of the matter is that that old one, that's because it was made in limited quantities that are now highly sought after. Something being exclusive doesn't necessarily make it better. And this is one that I have seen some people say. I've seen people in interviews say, like, you know, oh, well, I play an original Klon Centaur, and it really is that much better than, you know, whatever your copy is. And it's like, it's not thousands of dollars better. That's no discredit to Klon or anything, or to the original Centaur. Again, it's just kind of a look at how things are priced and why people buy what they buy. You know, it's the person who said that in an article, he was a touring artist who had a ton of money. And yeah, you can say that when you're like that, but it's really the exclusivity of it that makes that person feel like, oh yeah, I can say that because I have this limited kind of thing. It doesn't make it any better than anything else. It makes it more collectible. So that's what I have to say on this matter. Please let us know what you think. Let me know what I might have missed. What would you say to guitar snobs who are putting down your gear, and what sort of avenue do they put that down? I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.